Most people believe hard work is the answer. Work harder, stay longer, give more. And for years, you do exactly that. But somehow, the gap between where you are and where you want to be never closes. Here is the question nobody is asking. What if the problem is not your effort? What if the problem is the game you're playing? Because here's what you were never taught in school, never told by your parents, and what the people at the top will never say out loud. The rules that keep most people stuck were designed by the ones who already won. And the moment you understand that, everything changes. Stay with me until the end of this because the final chapter will completely reframe what you heard at the start. That shift alone could alter the direction of your life. Welcome to the Book Blueprint, and welcome to the mindset of the 1%. Before we go any further, let me be direct with you. This is not a video about money. Not yet. Money is downstream of something far more important. It is downstream of identity, belief, decision-making, and the invisible mental architecture that shapes every single choice you make before you are even aware you are making one. The people who built wealth from nothing did not stumble into it. They did not get lucky. They rebuilt their thinking from the ground up, brick by brick, until their default mode became the kind of thinking that creates results most people only dream about. And here's what's important to understand from the start. We are not talking about rich people who were born with advantages. We're not talking about inherited wealth or connections or favorable circumstances. We are talking about the specific psychological shifts that take place in the mind of someone who decides at some point in their life to stop being a passenger in their own story and start being the architect of it. That decision is not tied to age. It is not tied to background. It is not tied to your current financial situation or the family you came from or the city you grew up in. It is a decision available to any person who is willing to do the internal work that external results are built on top of. That's what this guide is about. This audio guide covers more than 50 principles. Each one is a layer. Each layer builds on what came before it. We start with the game being played, move through the psychological foundations, and end with the identity architecture that makes all of it sustainable long-term. By the time we reach the final chapter, you won't just understand these ideas intellectually. If you stay with this and let it land, you will feel the shift beginning somewhere underneath your thinking. That's the goal. Not information, transformation. Let us begin. Here's the first truth most people are never ready to hear. You are not losing because you're lazy. You are not losing because you're unlucky. You are not losing because the world is unfair, though sometimes it is. You are losing because you are competing in a game you didn't design, using rules you didn't write, chasing outcomes that someone else defined for you. The average person spends their life trying to win at fitting in, trying to survive the month, trying to keep everyone around them comfortable, trying to stay inside the lines. The 1% are playing a completely different game. They're not trying to fit in. They're trying to build leverage. They're not surviving the month. They're designing the decade. They're not trying to keep others comfortable. They're focused on becoming ungovernable by circumstance. Same planet, entirely different playing field. So how does this start? It starts with one rule. And this rule sounds simple, but the depth of it will take years to fully appreciate. Think in decades, not days. The average person obsesses over today, how they feel this morning, what someone said to them at lunch, whether their social media post performed, what small inconvenience disrupted their afternoon. And none of that is wrong on its own. But when your entire mental bandwidth is consumed by today, you lose sight of the arc. You lose sight of trajectory. The 1% obsess over trajectory. Where will this habit take me in 10 years? What will compound from this decision over the next decade? Which skills will outlast the next economic shift? Which relationships will multiply my opportunities 5 years from now? When you think that far ahead, something remarkable happens. The small problems stop feeling urgent. The small dramas stop pulling at your focus. The small distractions stop costing you your future. Small minds drown in small problems. Big minds outgrow them. Small minds drown in small problems. Big minds outgrow them. Here's something that rarely gets said in conversations about success and wealth, so pay attention. The most important asset the 1% own is not their investment portfolio. It's not their network. It's not even their skills. It's their mental environment. If you study high performers across any field, business, athletics, creative work, leadership, you'll find one shared characteristic that cuts across them all. They are ruthless about what they allow into their mind. They don't casually consume negative news cycles. They don't let emotionally draining people camp out in their headspace. They don't participate in gossip. They don't scroll without intention. They've built walls around their attention because they understand something the 99% have never been told. Your attention is not just a resource, it's the raw material of your future. Whatever you give your attention to, you build towards. Whatever you allow your mind to be filled with, your life grows around. The 1% fill their mental space with silence, intentional information, forward-focused people, books, mentors, and the quiet clarity that comes from protecting your mind like it's the most valuable thing you own. Because it is. Think about this honestly. How many people right now have access to your thoughts, your energy, your emotional bandwidth? How many of them have earned that privilege? How many of those voices are moving you forward versus holding you in place? Your life, in many ways, is the average of the conversations you allow. Control what enters and your output changes automatically. This next chapter is uncomfortable. I need you to sit with it. Most people fail, not because they lack talent, not because they lack intelligence or opportunity. Most people fail because they want to be liked more than they want to win. Read that again, because it explains more of the world than most people want to admit. The average person, before making a decision, runs it through a social filter. What will people think? Will they judge me? Will they support this or laugh at it? What if it doesn't work and everyone sees me fail? That filter is the cage. The 1% run their decisions through a completely different filter. Will this move me closer to who I am becoming? Will this compound over time? Which skills will outlast the next economic shift? Which relationships will multiply my opportunities 5 years from now? When you think that far ahead, something remarkable happens. The small problems stop feeling urgent. The small dramas stop pulling at your focus. The small distractions stop costing you your future. Small minds drown in small problems. Big minds outgrow them. Nobody who built something real had an easy path. Not at the beginning, not during the middle, not even once they arrived. But here's what separates the ones who make it from the ones who stop at the first hard wall. The 1% understand that difficulty is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that the process is working. Average thinking turns pain into a reason to quit. 1% thinking turns pain into a source of data. Failure contains information. Rejection builds durability. Struggle sharpens intelligence in ways that comfort never can. Every hard season carries seeds that, if you're willing to look, will grow into your next level. Pain is not your enemy. The habit of escaping it is. When most people hit a wall, they say, "This was a mistake." When the 1% hit the same wall, they say, "This is where the real work begins." Pain is not the enemy. The habit of escaping it is. Same event, completely different meaning, and meaning determines destiny. The 1% do not seek comfortable lives. They seek lives they can't be broken by. And the only way to build that kind of life is to stop running from the hard parts and start mining them for every lesson they contain.
Hard work is necessary, but hard work alone keeps most people broke. Not because working hard is wrong, but because hard work without leverage is just a treadmill. You burn energy, you move, but you do not go anywhere new. Leverage is the multiplier. It is when your knowledge earns for you even when you are asleep. When your systems create value without your constant presence. When your reputation opens rooms you have never entered. When your money grows other money. When your network solves problems you have not even faced yet. The average person sells their time. The 1% sell their judgment, their systems, their reputation, and their output. Time is finite. Leverage is not. The average person looks at an opportunity and says, "I can't afford that." The 1% look at the same opportunity and ask, what skills, what relationships, what positioning do I need to build so that this kind of door opens for me again? The first is a statement about today. The second is a strategy for tomorrow. This is why the wealthy gap continues to grow, not through luck, through the compounding power of leverage applied consistently over time. If you want to build a different life, the shift is this. Move from thinking about hours worked to thinking about value created, from effort to impact. That is the turning point most people never reach. Here's something that will probably annoy you at first, and then, if you think about it long enough, it will set you free. The 1% are not more motivated than you. Motivation is emotional. It rises and falls like the weather. It peaks on Monday morning after a good weekend and collapses by Wednesday when the work gets hard. Motivation is unreliable. The 1% know this, so they do not build their lives on it. They build systems, structures so solid that the question, "Do I feel like doing this today?" simply never comes up. The system removes the choice. The track is already laid. They just step onto it. Think about it this way. A professional athlete does not decide each morning whether to train based on how inspired they feel. The training is already scheduled, already expected, already part of who they are. It is not motivation that gets them to the gym. It's identity. It's structure. It's the fact that breaking the routine would feel more uncomfortable than doing it. That's what conditioning looks like. Consistency beats intensity every time. Identity beats inspiration every single time. Structure beats motivation without exception. You do not become someone worth being by what you do occasionally. You become it by what you refuse to stop doing. You're about to hear the most uncomfortable truth in this entire guide. Most people avoid this idea for their whole lives. They build entire philosophies around not hearing it. Are you ready? Everything is your responsibility. Not your fault, your responsibility. Those two things are different, and the difference changes everything. It's not your fault you weren't born with every advantage. It's not your fault that the system has flaws. It's not your fault that people let you down. Those things may be completely true, and they are still not the point. The 1% do not spend their energy calculating who is to blame. They spend their energy asking, given where I am right now, what must I do next? Not who put me here, what do I do from here? Blame keeps you frozen. Responsibility puts you in motion. The moment you take full ownership over your life, not just the parts you created, but also the parts you didn't, you become something completely different. You stop being someone things happen to. You start being someone who shapes what happens. That shift from victim to architect is the psychological foundation of the 1% mindset, and it's available to you right now, in this moment, before anything in your external world has changed. The world teaches you to choose the safe road, get the stable job, take the predictable path, protect what you have, avoid the dream of the risk. And most people follow that advice because it feels sensible, it feels responsible, it feels like what smart people do. But here's what nobody tells you. Safety is often the most dangerous choice you can make. Not because safety is wrong, but because safety without growth is slow decay. You do not fail dramatically when you play it safe. You simply stop becoming, and stopping becomes the quiet tragedy of a life that almost was. The 1% choose exposure. Exposure to new challenges that stretch their capacity. Exposure to risks that reveal what they are truly made of. Exposure to discomfort that builds the kind of strength no comfortable life can produce. And underneath all of that is one law, unchangeable and absolute. Your income will never exceed your self-belief. You cannot outperform the version of yourself you see in the mirror. The 1% bet on themselves, not blindly, strategically. They invest in their skills, they build their reputation, they develop their judgment, and they bet consistently and long on the one asset they have complete control over, themselves. Picture this. An economic downturn hits, jobs shrink, prices spike, everyone around you is panicking. Two people face the same storm. One says, "This is terrible, everything is getting worse." They freeze, they wait, they hope it passes. The other says, "Where's the gap right now? What problem needs solving that didn't exist before? Who needs something that nobody's offering?" They move, they plan, they build quietly while everyone else stands still. Same economic reality, completely different outcome. The 1% don't have access to different information than you. They've trained themselves to look at information through a different lens. They're not searching for threats, they're searching for opportunities that become visible only in moments of disruption.
Opportunity does not disappear when things get hard. Your ability to see it does.
The 1% train that ability like a muscle. They practice looking for needs that are not being met, skills the market suddenly values, problems that have grown large enough to pay someone to solve. When others freeze, the 1% move. When others panic, they plan. When others retreat, they quietly advance. This is not recklessness. It is preparation meeting awareness. Here is one of the most overlooked truths about people who build extraordinary things. They do not announce it. The average person wants visible progress. They want applause, likes, comments, validation. They want someone to see them working. They need external confirmation that they are on the right track. The 1% want something different. They want results. They want mastery. They want leverage that compounds quietly in the background while the world is looking elsewhere. There's a reason seeds grow in darkness. If you dig one up every day to measure its progress, it never becomes a tree. Your future grows faster when fewer people have access to it. Silence protects the vision. When people do not know what you are building, they cannot introduce doubt into it. They cannot distract it, dilute it, or derail it with their own fears and limitations. The 1% work in silence, not because they are secretive. They work in silence because silence protects momentum, and momentum, once broken, is costly to rebuild. Build quietly. Let results be the announcement. Most people spend their careers trying to be better than someone else, better scores, better numbers, better results than the person next to them. And that drive has its place at the beginning, but the 1% eventually move past it. Because here's what the 1% figured out. Being better than someone else is temporary. Someone can always out-hustle you on a bad week, but being different, being the only option in a category you created, that's permanent. The question the 1% ask is not, how do I beat them? The question is, how do I become the only choice? How do I build a category where comparison stops making sense? When you stop competing, you start creating. When you stop running someone else's race, you start building your own track. The world does not pay a premium for who's slightly better. The world pays a premium for what is genuinely different. This is the difference between winning a competition and making the competition irrelevant. Most people believe money is the most valuable resource. The 1% know it's not. Time is. Because money, in theory, can return. A lost hour never does. This is not motivational language. This is how the wealthiest people actually think. They calculate every commitment, every meeting, every relationship against a single question. Is this worth the investment at the future rate of who I am becoming? Not who I am today, who I am on my way to becoming. When you genuinely feel the value of your time, everything reorganizes. You stop tolerating conversations that drain without adding. You stop chasing distractions disguised as opportunities. You stop giving hours to things that will not matter in 5 years. Your standards quietly rise, not because you became arrogant, but because you finally understood what you're trading. Most people are not losing because they're incapable. They're losing because their attention is scattered across 100 things that don't matter. The 1% narrow the scatter, and everything accelerates. Here is the mental prison that keeps millions of people stuck year after year in a cycle of almost starting. They're waiting for the right moment. When things calm down, I will start. When I have more saved, I will begin. When I feel more confident, I will take the leap. When life settles, I will build the thing. But life does not settle. There's no notification that says, okay, the path is clear, you may begin now. The perfect moment doesn't arrive, it's built, out of imperfect conditions, imperfect information, and the decision to move anyway. The 1% do not wait for clarity, they create clarity by moving. They do not wait for confidence, they create confidence by acting. They do not wait for the fear to disappear, they discover through repeated action that movement is the cure. Here is the paradox most people miss. Preparation does not create momentum. Momentum creates preparation. The ideas come faster when you're moving. The resources appear more often when you're in motion. The right people show up when you're already building. The world rewards momentum. Act, then adjust. That's the 1% formula. One of the quietest and most liberating shifts that separate high achievers from the rest is this: they stopped needing to be understood. Think about how much mental energy goes into managing what other people think of you, the explanations, the justifications, the small edits to your choices so that people around you stay comfortable, the plans quietly abandoned because someone raised an eyebrow. Here's the reality. People will misread you regardless. They will form opinions whether you share everything or say nothing. They will create stories about you based on their own history, their own fears, their own comfort with what's possible. So the 1% stop chasing understanding and start chasing purpose. They don't need applause before they start. They don't need permission before they grow. They don't need a crowd behind them to feel legitimacy. And here's the psychological truth behind this. When you rise, the world adjusts. When you shrink, the world does not notice. So the 1% choose to rise, and they allow the confusion around them to exist because they are too busy becoming who they were built to be. Being misunderstood is not failure. It's often the price tag for transformation. You can identify a 1% thinker by a single trait alone before you know anything else about them. They think in decades. And that one mental habit changes everything downstream. When you think long-term, you stop chasing validation. You stop making decisions based on how you feel today. You stop giving up when a good strategy does not produce immediate results. You stop comparing your beginning to someone else's middle. The average person is addicted to immediacy, quick wins, fast results, visible progress, dopamine from the short loop. And so they chase things that feel good in the moment and abandon them before the compound effect kicks in. The 1% understand that success is compound interest applied to behavior. The gains are invisible for months, sometimes years, and then suddenly they are undeniable. They are willing to be unseen for a long time because they know visibility comes to those who refuse to quit. What decision today will pay dividends for the next decade? That's the question the 1% wake up asking. Before wealth, before success, before recognition or leverage or mastery, there is one thing every person who builds something real must construct first: self-trust. Most people don't trust themselves. That's why they hesitate before starting. That's why they break promises to themselves repeatedly and feel the quiet accumulation of that betrayal. That's why confidence feels like something they are waiting to receive, rather than something they are building every day. Every time you make a commitment to yourself and follow through on it, you add a brick to the foundation. Every time you break that commitment, you remove one. Self-trust is not a feeling. It's a track record you build with yourself in private.
The 1% treat their word to themselves as law. Not optional, not flexible depending on how they feel that morning. If they said they would do it, they do it. Not because of discipline alone, but because they have built an identity in which breaking their own commitments is not something that person does. This is the foundation under everything else. Without it, every strategy collapses. With it, every strategy has a chance. There's a myth that stops millions of people from ever seriously beginning. The myth goes like this: one day, when I am successful enough, the fear will stop. I will wake up confident. I will move without hesitation. The anxiety will disappear. It does not. The 1% feel fear too. Every time they take on something bigger than what they have done before. Every time they step into a room they have not been in. Every time they launch something they have never launched. The difference is not that they feel less fear. The difference is that they have stopped waiting for the fear to leave before they act. They learn something that most people take a lifetime to discover. Fear is not a stop sign. It is a directional signal. It points directly at the edge of your current capacity. And your current capacity is the only thing standing between who you are now and who you are capable of becoming. So the 1% use fear the way a navigator uses a compass. If something scares them, that is exactly where they look next. Average people wait for courage. The 1% act first and discover that courage was built into the action the whole time. The average person waits for motivation. They treat it like sunlight. If it comes out today, they will work. If it does not, they will wait for tomorrow. The 1% have retired from the motivation game entirely. They understand motivation is emotional, and emotions shift with the weather, the week, the mood, the news. So they built something that does not depend on how they feel. They built momentum. Momentum is different from motivation because momentum does not care about your emotional state. It only cares that you began. And once you begin, a chain reaction starts that no amount of motivation alone can manufacture. Action creates clarity. Clarity creates confidence. Confidence creates consistency. Consistency creates a new identity, and the new identity becomes self-sustaining. The 1% do not ask, how do I stay motivated? They ask, what is the smallest step I can take right now that keeps the machine moving? Even 1%, even a tiny, almost invisible action. Because tiny actions signal to the brain that we are in motion, and motion builds on itself. That's why the 1% become unstoppable, not because they feel amazing every day, because they built a system that moves even on the days they do not. There is something the 1% protect more fiercely than their bank account, more fiercely than their schedule, more fiercely even than their reputation, their attention. Your life moves towards whatever you consistently focus on, not what you intend to focus on, not what you wish you focused on, what you actually repeatedly give your eyes and energy to day after day. The average person leaks attention without realizing it. Endless scrolling, constant checking, reactive conversations, emotional drains disguised as relationships, distractions so common they became invisible. And quietly, the years pass, and the gap between who they are and who they could have been grows. The 1% do something that feels extreme to the average person. They engineer their environment to force focus, not just encourage it, force it. They do not rely on willpower because they know willpower eventually loses under sustained pressure. They remove the distraction at the source. They build desks without phones. They structure mornings without noise. They create spaces where deep work is the default rather than the struggle. They understand what most people are still learning. Willpower is a muscle that tires, but environment is a structure that does not. Design your environment and you design your outcomes. Most people don't know why they do what they do. They repeat the same patterns in relationships, in work, in habits, in responses to stress. They make the same mistakes with slightly different scenery, and they never quite understand why. The 1% treat this problem as a research project. They watch their emotional patterns the way a scientist watches an experiment. They track what triggers them, what depletes them, what lights them up, what drags them back to old behavior. They ask questions most people are afraid to ask. What belief is underneath this reaction? What fear is driving this avoidance? What pattern has been repeating in my life for years that I've never named? This is not therapy as weakness. This is self-knowledge as strategy. Because the 1% understand if you do not understand your own operating system, life runs it for you, and life's default settings were not designed to serve your ambitions. The wealthiest people are not just financially literate. They are emotionally intelligent, psychologically self-aware, and brutally honest when examining their own patterns. That combination allows them to make better decisions faster, with less self-sabotage over longer periods of time. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with silence. Not because silence is dangerous, but because silence reveals what we have been distracting ourselves from. In the silence, we hear the gap between who we said we would be and who we have actually been. We hear the dreams we have been postponing. We hear the fears we have been avoiding. We hear the changes we know we need to make but have not yet been brave enough to begin. That's why most people fill every quiet moment with noise. Podcasts, music, scrolling, talking, anything to avoid sitting with themselves long enough to hear what they actually need to hear. The 1% do the opposite. They walk deliberately into silence, because you cannot build a strong internal world from the outside. You cannot clarify your values in a crowd. You cannot hear your own direction over other people's noise. You cannot lead others until you have learned to lead your own mind. Solitude is not lonely. For the 1%, it's productive. It's where the real strategy gets designed. If there is one skill that separates those who build real lives from everyone else, it is not intelligence, it is not talent, it is this: the ability to respond rather than react. The average person reacts immediately. They take things personally. They are easily destabilized by criticism, rejection, or pressure. Their feelings drive their decisions, and their decisions, driven by emotion, tend to accelerate in exactly the wrong direction. The 1% have trained a pause into themselves. Before the response comes the breath. Before the decision comes the stillness. Before the action comes the question, is this logic or is this emotion? And if it is emotion, is this the emotion I want building my future? This is not emotional suppression. Suppression is dangerous. This is emotional mastery, which means feeling everything and choosing what you do with it. If someone can press a button and send your emotions spinning, they have indirect control over your decisions. And if they have control of your decisions, they have control of your direction. The 1% remove that button, not by becoming cold, by becoming clear. The average person sets goals. I want to lose weight. I want to make more money. I want to get fit. I want to become disciplined. And these are good intentions, but good intentions without architecture are just wishes. The 1% builds systems. A goal says I want to become healthy. A system says I move my body at 6:30 every morning because my clothes are already set out and my gym bag is already packed. A goal says I want to grow financially. A system says I invest automatically every month before I see the money. I study markets one morning a week and I track where every dollar is going. Goals end when motivation fades. Systems continue regardless. Goals require you to feel a certain way. Systems remove feeling from the equation. The 1% build lives so structurally designed that success stops being a decision. It becomes the path of least resistance. Their environment is optimized. Their habits are automatic. Their non-negotiables are already built into the calendar before the week begins. Success not as a burst of willpower, but as a default setting. That is what a system builds. Here is one of the deepest truths in this entire guide, and the reason most people's efforts plateau. You will never outperform your identity. You can push against it temporarily, you can override it with discipline for a while, but if the deep belief underneath is still, I am someone who struggles with this, or people like me do not win at this level, you will return to that identity the way a spring returns to its original shape. This is why the 1% do not just change what they do, they change who they believe they are. They ask not just what must I do, they ask who must I become. And then they start becoming that person first, before the results confirm it, before the bank account reflects it, before the external world has caught up to the internal shift. Your identity is the thermostat of your life. Set it to average, and you will keep returning to average, no matter how hard you push above it. Set it to wealthy, capable, disciplined, and unstoppable, and even when life knocks you back, you return to that level. The 1% rise and rise again, not because they never fall, but because their identity keeps pulling them back up. Everyone has heard of compound interest. What almost no one understands is compound behavior. The 1% apply compound interest logic to their daily decisions, not their investments alone, their daily choices. 10 minutes of reading each morning compounds into a library of knowledge over a decade. 1 hour of focused work on a skill each day compounds into mastery within 5 years. A single message of genuine connection sent regularly compounds into a network that changes the trajectory of your career. Small investments in health, made daily without drama, compound into a body that serves your ambitions instead of limiting them. The average person wants big results from big moments. The 1% know big results come from small actions repeated long enough that the math takes over, and the math always takes over eventually. They're not in a hurry. They are not chasing overnight success. They are stacking small wins, because small wins compound, and compounded wins become inevitable victories. Let us go deeper into what long-term thinking actually does to a person. When your mental default shifts from days to decades, the entire shape of your life reorganizes. You stop panicking over temporary problems. You stop comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20. You stop reacting to bad news as though it's permanent. You stop celebrating small wins as though they're final. You see your life as a long arc, and you build accordingly. The 1% build foundations quietly. They build networks slowly. They build skills with a patience that others mistake for passivity. And then, one day, after a long period of being invisible, they become undeniable. This is what the long game looks like from the outside. You look behind for a long time. Then, one day, you've lapped everyone who started running before you. Average people want results before the roots are deep enough to hold them. The 1% build roots first and trust that the fruit will come. Here's one of the most practical differences between people who build things and people who only plan to build them. The wealthy make decisions fast, and they revise slowly. This is not recklessness. It's the product of a deeper understanding. Clarity does not arrive before action. Clarity is created by action. When you're standing still, you can only see what's directly in front of you. When you're moving, the landscape opens up. You see what you couldn't see from a standstill. Doors appear that were invisible before you were moving. Problems reveal solutions that didn't exist until you were close enough to find them. Act, learn, adjust, repeat. That's the decision cycle of the 1%. You already know the 1% feel fear, but this chapter goes further. The 1% have learned to read fear the way a sailor reads wind direction, not as a threat, as information. If a conversation scares them, that's a conversation they need to have. If an opportunity feels intimidating, it means it will require them to grow, and growth is exactly what they're building toward. If starting a new skill feels overwhelming, they interpret the overwhelm as a marker for where their edge currently is, and the edge is exactly where they choose to work. Fear has become a compass. The reason most people never progress is avoidance. Fear tells them stop, and they do. The 1% hear that same signal and translate it differently. Fear tells them this is the direction. It doesn't mean charging ahead blindly. It means leaning in deliberately, with preparation, with strategy, and with the understanding that everything you want exists on the other side of the fear you've been avoiding. Let me dismantle the most common myth about confidence. Confidence is not something you have before you start. Confidence is something you build by starting. The 1% aren't born confident. They create confidence deliberately by stacking proof. Every time they do something difficult and survive, they gain evidence that they are capable of difficulty. Every time they keep a promise to themselves when it would have been easy to break it, they gain evidence that they are trustworthy to themselves. Every time they stay focused through discomfort, they gain evidence that they have the kind of character that gets things done. Action creates evidence. Evidence creates confidence. Confidence creates bigger action. Bigger action creates bigger evidence. And eventually, after enough cycles, you develop a confidence that is unshakable because it's not based on how you feel, it's based on what you've done. You don't need confidence to start. You need to start so that you can build the only kind of confidence that lasts. If you've ever been in a room with someone who's truly built their life, you notice something before they say anything particularly profound. They speak differently. Not louder, not with more technical language, not with arrogance, with precision, with calm, with a particular kind of unhurried authority that signals this person knows exactly where they're going. The 1% have learned that language is not just description, language is construction. The words you use consistently, privately and publicly, are laying the foundation of your reality. Instead of, I hope things get better, they say, I'm building something that changes this. Instead of, we'll see how it goes, they say, here's the direction. Instead of, I don't know if I can do this, they say, I'm learning how this works. The language removes uncertainty. It signals direction to the self before anyone else, and the self responds because your nervous system takes cues from your language just as much as from your experience. Change the words, change the internal signal, change the outcomes that follow. The 1% are not immune to distraction. No human is. But they have developed an awareness about distraction that most people never build. They track what drains them, what pulls their attention without producing anything worth the cost, what environments cloud their thinking versus which ones sharpen it, which people generate noise in their life versus which ones generate signal. And once they identify the source, they do not rely on willpower to resist it. They remove it, restructure around it, build a life where the distraction has no natural habitat. Most people fight distractions. The 1% design lives where there is less to fight. They understand the battle for focus is not won through superhuman self-control. It is won through deliberate environment design. The right environment is a silent teacher. It teaches you to rise without forcing the lesson. Here's a pattern that keeps people locked in place for years without them ever noticing. They argue for their limitations. Not to others necessarily, to themselves. That is just how I am. I've never been good at this. I'm not a disciplined person. It's too late for someone like me. People from my background do not succeed at that level. Every time that internal monologue runs unchallenged, it gets written a little deeper into the operating system, and eventually it becomes the story that runs your life. The 1% catch that voice, and they argue back. They do not argue for their current limitations, they argue for their potential. They protect the version of themselves that does not yet exist, but will given enough time and the right decisions. You cannot build a powerful future while reinforcing a powerless story about your past. Those two things cannot coexist. Choose which story gets your arguments. The 1% do not make success harder, they make it easier. And this is completely counterintuitive to most people's understanding of what it means to be disciplined. If they want to exercise consistently, the gym bag is packed and by the door the night before. The gym is already scheduled like a client meeting. The friction of deciding and preparing has been eliminated. If they want to write each morning, the notebook is already open on the desk and the phone is in another room. The friction of starting has been removed. They understand that most dreams do not die from dramatic failure. They die from tiny daily friction that wears down the will until the person simply stops trying. Remove the friction and the success becomes natural, automated. The path of least resistance begins to slope in the direction of your goals rather than away from them. This is not laziness. This is intelligent design applied to your own life. Most people run their lives on emotion. They feel tired, so they stop. They feel anxious, so they avoid. They feel uncertain, so they wait. They feel discouraged, so they quit. The 1% make a different trade. They trade emotional comfort today for the life they want tomorrow. This is not about suppressing emotion. It's about understanding what emotions are, temporary reports from the nervous system. They are not permanent truths. They are weather, and weather changes. Consequences, however, are permanent. The 10 years of compound work you did not do because you didn't feel like it today. The skill you did not build because it was uncomfortable. The relationship you did not invest in because you were too busy feeling whatever you were feeling in the moment. The 1% made a decision once to be led by their principles, not their emotions, by their future self, not their current feelings, by the direction they chose deliberately, not the mood they happened to wake up with. That decision, made once and reinforced daily, is the most underrated strategy in building an extraordinary life. You have been told your entire life to manage your time. Time management is a category, a skill, an industry worth billions of dollars, and it is at its core a mislabeled product. Because here's the truth, time doesn't change. It doesn't rearrange itself for you. It doesn't pause when you're overwhelmed or speed up when you're ready. Every person on earth gets exactly the same amount of time each day. What is not equal is self-management, the discipline to start when you said you would, the clarity to know what matters before the day begins, the courage to say no to the things that feel urgent but are not important, the focus to stay on one thing long enough for it to compound. The 1% are not better than you. They are better at controlling the one variable that controls everything else, themselves. When people say, "I don't have time," they almost always mean, "I have not decided that this is worth making space for." The 1% make that decision in advance, and they build their life around the answer. This chapter will offend some people and liberate others. The 1% do fewer things than most people around them. The difference is they do those fewer things with a level of precision and consistency that creates results no amount of frantic busyness can match. Most people spread themselves across too many goals, too many commitments, too many strategies, too many distractions they have convinced themselves are opportunities. They have confused motion with direction. They are busy in every direction, which means they are effectively moving in none. The 1% prune, deliberately and regularly. Everything that doesn't compound toward the future they are building gets cut. Not because they're cold or unfeeling, because they have learned that most of what feels urgent is actually optional. And optional things accepted without question fill the space where your actual life was supposed to be built. Do not try to do everything. Do the right things, relentlessly, repeatedly, long past the point when others would have stopped. Do you know what creates anxiety in people more than anything else? Not pressure, not problems, not challenges. It's not knowing what to do next. When your direction is unclear, the mind panics. When you can't see the next step, it fills the gap with catastrophic speculation, and the panic consumes energy that should have been going toward action. The 1% eliminate this through a daily practice. Each evening they answer 3 questions. What are the 3 things that must get done tomorrow that actually matter? What obstacles might appear, and how will I handle them? What is the first thing I do the moment I start? That ritual eliminates overwhelm before the morning begins. It eliminates indecision. It eliminates the wasted 30 minutes of confused wandering that kills productive mornings for millions of people daily. When you always know your next move, you are always moving. And movement, consistently in the right direction, is what transforms an ordinary life into an extraordinary one. From the outside, successful people look lucky. The right timing, the right connection, the right opportunity appearing at exactly the right moment. And people watching from the outside say, they got lucky, that's why. But here's what's invisible from the outside. The years of preparation that made them the right person when that opportunity appeared. The skills built long before anyone was watching. The credibility earned through work nobody saw anymore. The network cultivated through consistent generosity before there was anything to gain from it. The resilience developed through earlier failures nobody talks about anymore. The 1% treat readiness as a permanent state of preparation. They don't prepare for the next opportunity when it appears. They stay ready before it arrives. Because when opportunity comes, it doesn't wait. The window opens and closes, and whether you were ready determines whether you walk through or watch it close. Prepare now for the opportunity you cannot see, so when it arrives, you catch it. Most people operate in a sequence that always fails them. They say, when I have the results, I will believe I'm that kind of person. When I am successful, I will think like a successful person. When I build wealth, I will act disciplined. When I build wealth, I will start thinking about wealth. The 1% flip that sequence entirely. They decide who they are first, then they build the results to match it. They think like the person they are becoming before the evidence shows up in the world. They speak like that person, make decisions like that person, carry themselves like that person. And because they are constantly acting from that identity, the results begin to restructure themselves around it. Identity leads, results follow. This sequence is not optional, it's the only order that works. Trying to reverse it is like trying to plant a tree by growing fruit first and hoping roots appear eventually. Decide who you are, become that person, let the world catch up.
It sounds simple. It is not easy, because most people have a gap. They say they want one thing and they do something else. They describe a future self they admire and then live like someone going the opposite direction. The 1% close that gap, not with guilt, but with honesty. Each day they ask one question:
Are my actions today aligned with the person I am building toward? And if the answer is no, they adjust. Not with shame, not with self-criticism, with alignment. Average people have desires. The 1% have identity-driven behaviors. And behavior, repeated long enough, rewrites the identity until the gap disappears entirely. Here is a psychological tool the 1% use that most people overlook completely. They live from their future identity now. Not after the success arrives, not when the bank balance reflects it, not once the world has confirmed it, now. Before the evidence, before the recognition, before the results. They ask themselves, how would the version of me I am working towards show up in this meeting? How would that person respond to this setback? How would they spend their Sunday morning? How would they handle this opportunity? And then they act from that place even when their current reality does not match it yet. This is not delusion. It is the opposite of delusion. It is the deliberate, strategic practice of becoming before the world gives you permission to be. When you consistently behave as your future self, your present self restructures around that identity. Not one day, a little every day, until the gap between who you are and who you are becoming shrinks and disappears. One of the quietest traps in personal transformation is the need to narrate your growth to others. People feel compelled to explain why they changed, to justify the new version of themselves, to seek understanding from people who knew the old version and are confused by the new one. The 1% resist this. They evolve in silence, not because they are secretive, because they understand something about transformation that most people never learn. Not everyone deserves front-row access to your becoming. Some people have an interest in you staying exactly where you are. Your growth is not a press release. It is a private project. They do not ask permission to become more. They do not negotiate the direction of their growth with people who are not growing. They transform and let the results do the talking. This is not arrogance. It is respect for the process. Identity is fragile in ways that most people do not account for. Not dramatically fragile, quietly, gradually fragile. The company you keep shapes your self-image before you notice it happening. The conversations you participate in set the ceiling on what you believe is possible. The environment you inhabit every day either expands your identity or slowly erodes it. The 1% guard their identity intentionally. They distance themselves from environments that reinforce mediocrity. They limit exposure to voices that celebrate small thinking. They choose very deliberately who they spend sustained time around because they understand that influence is not always conscious. You can be influenced toward your ambitions or away from them, and the process is so gradual it's almost impossible to detect from the inside. The 1% account for this. They curate their environment to match the identity they're building rather than the one they're leaving behind. If your environment does not match the person you're trying to become, your environment will slowly unmake the person you're trying to become. This is one of the deepest secrets about how extraordinary people sustain their rise. They trust themselves completely, not because they're always right, because they have a track record of honoring their own word. Self-trust means this. When you say you will do something, you do it. When you commit to a direction, you stay in it past the point of comfort. When you promise yourself an early morning, the alarm goes off and you stand up. Not because you feel like it, because you are that kind of person. Every kept promise to yourself adds interest to the account. Every broken one makes a withdrawal. And most people, over a lifetime of small withdrawals, end up with a self-trust deficit so large that even their own ambitions feel like lies. The 1% rebuild this account deliberately, one kept commitment at a time, until their word to themselves becomes the most reliable currency in their life. And at that point, every strategy they try works better. Every system holds. Every push through discomfort produces results, because the foundation under all of it is solid. The world will tell you not to obsess. Everything in moderation. Don't fixate. Don't pour yourself into one thing. Spread out. Stay balanced. And there's wisdom in that for certain things. But for the one thing you're building toward, the skill you're developing, the life you're creating, obsession is not the enemy. Dabbling is. The 1% are obsessed, not in a self-destructive way, in a purposeful, disciplined, relentlessly focused way. They are obsessed with getting better, with mastering their craft, with compounding their skills past the point where anyone can casually replicate them. Most people try. The 1% commit. Most people attempt. The 1% transform. The difference is depth, and depth requires an obsession that most people have been socialized out of. Your future requires a level of focus that the world around you will call excessive. Let it. They are not building what you are building. The average person looks at someone who has built something remarkable and feels envy. Why them? What did they do differently? Why does it seem so easy for some and hard for others? The 1% look at the same success and ask, what can I learn from this? Those two responses produce completely different outcomes. Envy shuts you down. It makes the success of others into evidence against your own possibility. Curiosity opens you up. It makes the success of others into a proof of concept for your own potential. Every person you admire, if you stop admiring from a distance and start studying closely, is showing you that the thing you want exists, that it's real, that someone built it, which means the blueprint exists, and the question becomes, what was the blueprint? The 1% don't resent people who made it. They study them, because envy wastes energy and curiosity builds it. The average person relates to failure like a verdict. It means something about who they are. It's evidence that they should have known better, that they're not cut out for this, that the universe is sending them a message. The 1% relate to failure like an engineer relates to a failed test. Useful, informative, the exact kind of data that points toward what to adjust next. They don't add dramatic meaning to what happened. They take notes. When something didn't work, what was the variable that failed? What does this tell me about the strategy? What would need to be different for the next attempt to produce a different result? No identity crisis, no emotional crash, no public narrative about what it means, just data collected and applied to the next iteration. Failure does not define you, it refines you, if you let it. The world says failure is the opposite of success. The 1% know failure is part of the system of success. Every person who fails and tries again is already ahead of everyone who never started. There's a paradox at the center of 1% thinking that confuses most people when they first encounter it. The 1% move fast. We established that. They decide quickly. They act without waiting for perfect conditions. They build momentum through speed of execution. And yet, simultaneously, they are among the most patient people alive when it comes to long-term results. How can both of these things be true? How can someone be both urgently action-oriented and profoundly patient at the same time? The answer is that they have separated two completely different timelines in their mind. In the short term, they move fast. Decisions happen quickly. Action follows immediately. Adjustments are made without drama. But in the long term, in the timeline where results actually compound and outcomes are measured, they are deeply patient. They don't expect the 10-year return in month 3. They don't abandon a solid strategy because it hasn't produced visible results in the first 90 days. They understand that the most powerful forces in the universe, compound interest, root systems, reputation, mastery, all work on timelines that look like nothing for a long time and then look like everything all at once. This combination, fast action, patient expectation, is the rarest mental configuration in the world. Most people are either fast and impatient, burning out when results don't match pace, or slow and patient, waiting for a signal to act that never comes. The 1% hold both. They sprint in the short term. They think in decades. And that combination, sustained over years, produces outcomes that look miraculous from the outside and feel inevitable from the inside. You make promises to others, to your employer, to your clients, to your family. And most people take those promises seriously because there's visible accountability. Someone will notice if you break them. But what about the promises you make to yourself? The ones you break quietly, with no audience, no consequences visible in the moment. I will start tomorrow. This time I will be consistent. I will wake up early. I will stop wasting time. Each broken promise is a small withdrawal from the most important account you have. The 1% treats self-promises as contracts, non-negotiable, not subject to renegotiation based on mood or convenience. When they say they will do something, it gets done. Not because someone is watching, because they are watching. This is the defining characteristic. Every kept promise to yourself builds the version of yourself that is capable of more. Every broken one delays it, and they have decided long ago to not delay anymore. The world will test your focus, not once, constantly. Old habits will offer their comfort. People around you will offer their doubt. Life will offer distractions dressed as emergencies. And if you don't have a clear, vivid, emotional, real picture of what you're building, the noise will win. The 1% remind themselves daily, not with vague ambition, with specificity. Who am I becoming? What does the life I am building actually look and feel like? What would I be giving up if I stopped right now? What would be possible if I stayed the course for another decade? This is not motivational rhetoric. It is functional strategy, because the mind that knows exactly why it is doing what it is doing is nearly impossible to stop, and the mind that is forgotten is vulnerable to everything. They are not motivated by income. They are driven by becoming, by the process of transformation itself. And once you fall in love with becoming, the pull of ordinary life loses its grip. Here is something that rarely gets discussed in conversations about elite performance. Even the 1% have seasons where the system breaks down, where the habits slip, where the momentum stalls, where the identity feels shaky. The difference is not that this never happens to them. The difference is in how they respond when it does.
They do not attach narrative to the interruption. They do not build a story around what the gap means. They simply ask, what is the smallest action I can take right now to restart the momentum? And they take it, today. Not tomorrow, not after they have punished themselves sufficiently, today. The ability to restart without drama is one of the underrated skills in the entire 1% toolkit, because life will always interrupt you. Seasons will end, focus will waver, circumstances will shift. The question is never whether the rhythm breaks. The question is how fast you rebuild it. The 1% rebuild fast because they do not waste energy on the narrative. They put all of it into the restart. Nobody warns you about this, and if they did, most people still would not believe it until they experience it firsthand. When you start growing, the people who knew you before the growth will not always celebrate it. Some will, the ones who love you in a way that wants what is best for you, not what keeps them comfortable around you, they will celebrate. But others will become strange. They will grow distant. They will make small comments that do not quite land as jokes. They will ask loaded questions. They will subtly, almost imperceptibly, try to pull you back toward the version of yourself they recognize. This is not because they are bad people. It is because your growth is a mirror, and mirrors can be uncomfortable to look at when you are not yet willing to change what you see. The 1% understand this social cost in advance. They do not resent it, they do not let it make them cruel or cold, but they do not let it stop them either. They grieve the relationships that cannot survive their growth. They invest more deeply in the ones that can, and they build new connections with people who are building towards something similar. Your community is not just emotional support, it is directional infrastructure. The people around you are either pulling you toward your potential or away from it. Knowing which is which and acting accordingly is one of the most courageous and necessary things you will ever do. This is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to build more intentionally. One of the most consistent habits across elite performers, across industries, across cultures, is a habit that looks like subtraction rather than addition. They say no, often, decisively, and without lengthy explanation. The average person says yes by default and works backward from overwhelm. They say yes to the meeting that will not move anything forward, yes to the social obligation that drains without replenishing, yes to the project that sounds interesting but does not align with the direction, yes to every request that comes with social pressure attached. And then they wonder why, despite being constantly busy, they're not making progress. The 1% understand that saying no is not rejection, it is curation. Every no to the wrong thing is a yes to the right thing, protecting that space, preserving that energy, directing that attention where it will actually compound. They do not need to explain every no at length. They do not need to justify their priorities to everyone who asks for a piece of them. They have decided what they are building, and they protect the time required to build it with the same conviction they protect their physical health. Your ability to say no to good things is what creates space for the great things. The 1% are not unsociable. They are not cold. They are simply clear. And clarity in a world of infinite noise and competing demands is one of the rarest and most powerful assets you can carry. Here's a habit that almost no one practices, but every serious builder eventually discovers: scheduled self-review. Not journaling for emotional release, though that has its place, not casual reflection, a structured, honest review of the direction your life is actually moving versus the direction you said it was going. The 1% treat this like a board meeting with the most important company they run, themselves. They sit down weekly, monthly,
quarterly, and they ask hard questions without flinching from the answers. Am I actually doing what I said I would do, or am I just maintaining the appearance of progress? Are the habits I'm running today building the life I want in 5 years, or are they just keeping me comfortable? Where is my energy going that is not producing what I want? What patterns have repeated in my decisions that I have not yet addressed? This is not self-criticism, it is self-management. There is a profound difference. Self-criticism drains, self-management produces. The 1% review not to feel guilty about gaps, but to close them, not to punish themselves for what they didn't do, but to design a clearer path toward what they will. The review is strategic, and strategy without review is just a wish with a timeline attached. Review your life regularly. Adjust early. The cost of a small course correction taken early is a fraction of the cost of a major one taken late. Here's the quiet goal that most people never articulate, but every serious builder is building toward. A life they don't need a vacation from. Not because they never rest. Rest is part of the system, but because the life itself, the direction, the daily experience of working towards something real feels like a privilege rather than a sentence. Most people are building lives they're always escaping through weekends, through entertainment, through substances, through fantasy. The week is something to survive. The weekend is where the real life happens. And slowly, without noticing, they have accepted a life structured around escape rather than around meaning. The 1% build differently. They build work that feels like expression. They build relationships that feel like investment. They build routines that feel like care. Not every day is extraordinary, not every task is thrilling, but the direction is chosen, and the chosen direction creates a quality of life that doesn't require escaping from itself. This is the ultimate expression of the 1% mindset, not just to earn more, not just to work smarter, but to build over time a life so aligned with who you actually are that showing up for it is its own reward. It starts with the decision to take the building seriously. That decision is available to you right now. We have reached the final chapter, and I want to say something directly. There is nothing that the 1% possess that you cannot build. Not their courage, not their discipline, not their emotional control, not their focus or clarity or resilience or decision-making ability. None of it is genetic. None of it is inherited. None of it is available only to a certain kind of person from a certain kind of background. Every single quality we have talked about in this guide is learnable, buildable, practicable. The 1% did not receive these traits. They chose them repeatedly until choosing them became automatic. You are not behind. You are not too damaged. You are not too late. You are not too ordinary. You are not missing the capacity. You are simply at a moment of decision. Because this is what the opening hook was really pointing at. The game was never about intelligence or luck or the right circumstances. The game was always about the decision to play differently, to think at a different frequency, to hold yourself to a different standard in private long before the world sees any of it. The moment you choose to think like the 1%, you step on that path. The moment you choose discipline over distraction, you step further still. The moment you choose your future self over your current comfort, you step closer still. And if you stay on that path, compounding every small decision over enough time, you don't just study the 1% from a distance, you become one of them. Repeat this internally like you mean it. From today, I think forward, not backward. I build in silence. I act without waiting for permission. I keep my word to myself. I protect my attention like it is my most valuable asset. I am not defined by where I started. I am defined by the decisions I make from here. I no longer compete for space. I build space. I no longer wait for the right moment. I create it. I no longer run from discomfort. I use it as fuel. I think in decades. I act in moments. I measure in consistency. I judge myself not by how I feel today, but by who I am becoming over time. This is the mindset that builds. This is the psychology that compounds. This is the identity of the 1%. And it has always been available to you. Not one day, today. If this resonated with something real inside you, if you felt something shift at any point during this guide, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. The Book Blueprint exists for people who take ideas seriously, who understand that a single reframed thought absorbed at the right moment can change the arc of a life. This channel does not put out content to fill a schedule. Every video is built to give you a genuine edge, a real psychological tool, a usable idea that compounds in your life over time the same way money compounds in an account. The difference between someone who watches and someone who subscribes is simple. One watches once, the other builds a library of thinking that keeps paying back. People who operate at the 1% level do not drift. They are intentional about what they invest in. They curate what they feed their mind with the same care they bring to every other part of their life. If you're that kind of person, this is your channel. If this resonated, hit like and subscribe to the Book Blueprint. We're just getting started, and the best content is ahead.